Welcome to episode 6 of Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million-part series. I'm Logan Wolf, a missionary to the state of Utah, coming to you from my office in Provo. And I am joined by fellow church planter, mistake maker, Isaac in California. Isaac, I appreciate you being here with me. Why don't you introduce yourself, give us a rundown of what's happening out your way.
Yeah. So again, like you said, my name's Isaac. I've planted a church back in March of 2011. Hard to believe it was that long ago. And we started in Orange County, California. Unbeknownst to me, the place where church plants go to die. And found that out over the next few years. And so we've been here, over 12 years now, and here with my family. And I think a lot like your story has the way in which we have envisioned church, do church has changed quite a bit over the past several years. And so, we're seeing disciples made, seeing some good health. So we're encouraged in that. So
that's awesome, man. I was excited to have you on because I know we've been on the field the exact same amount of time. In fact, you've been there just a couple months longer. So 12 years, that's plenty of time to look back and say, what was I thinking? Yeah. And I know, and I just from our friendship and conversations, I know ministry now is like neither of us had envisioned it 12 years ago. And so there's a lot of lessons I think learned. And I'm excited about our conversation today. So do you want to introduce what are we talking about today? Do you want to introduce the topic for us?
Yeah. So today, as this is, I think, your first podcast with another person.
It is
involved. That's kind of what we're talking about today. We're talking about team, or more specifically, the lack of team that we had. And by we, I mean you and me.
Yeah.
Certainly, as we had when we started. And that was a huge mistake, massive mistake on our part. And I think you would echo that as well. And
in fact, that'll be the title of this episode. What's the I came to the field without a team. That was the mistake. That's huge. So why don't, because this is funny here, why don't you start by what did your team look like when you guys got in Orange County?
So if you can envision a beardless, slimmer version of the guy that's on this podcast, that was my team. And of course my wife, and probably the most impactful player on our team at that time was my 3-year-old daughter, Ava. She's now one of 4. But it was just me and my wife. We came down here by ourselves, and we had some components of a team, and we weren't talking about this before. It just kind of popped in my head, but we had some components in terms of prayer, some finances, right. But all of that was very distant, far away. And so in terms of feet on the ground, actively doing the work week in, week out, preparing, planning, strategizing, all of that. Unfortunately, it was just me,
So, and I do want to clarify, when we're talking about teams, I am talking about people on the ground, on the field together. I think it was in the last episode where I talked about the role of our home church, and may even have mentioned it when I talk about fundraising. I get that there are people in the background. And it's important to have a strong team. I've talked about the tooth to tail ratio and how the people who are supporting you and praying for you and giving to you and encouraging you and all this, that is a team. And so I'm not downplaying that. I certainly don't want to overlook that. But Isaac and I today, we are talking about the people you actually started the church with there on the field. So I'm like you, Isaac. I came with my wife. And it was the dumbest, and we didn't even have any kids yet. So, it was just the dumbest thing ever. Just me and her. I was 25. She was 23. I look back at that. I'm like, if a 25-year-old came up to me, I wouldn't even listen to 25, So it's like, I'm like, this is just so ridiculous. But I feel like our decision to do that partly was impatience. Like we were so eager and ready that we just didn't want to. I mean, I don't know what your motivation. There probably was some arrogance on my part too. Like I don't need a team. Like God called me out there. I feel like so. Like just why did you show up without a team, bro?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So certainly us going to plant a church, yeah, 100%. I mean, you can talk about a couple things there. The need is so great. I mean, your environment, like mine, was a great one, evangelistic one, disciple making emphasis, all of that, church planting emphasis. But yeah, it's like, hey, we're not asking Jesus if there's a harvest, right? Jesus told us there's a harvest, and it's literally like every second you're not on the field. That's, I mean, whatever, like we could go through the sermon graphic of how many people slipped into hell in the last, minute and a half, 2 minutes we've been talking, now. And so there's this very critical urgency, to the mission, which is still true. There's obvious urgency behind the Great Commission. But for me too, I was in a situation where I was doing a extension ministry, literally a trip to get there from where we lived was 2 hours. Like we had to drive 2 hours to get there to where we were going to do ministry all day, and then come back another 2-hour drive, so part of it was I cannot do this at a sustainable rate and do ministry from this distance. And I was done with college. I was serving on staff. And so it was sort of in my brain, it was like, okay, it's time to go. It's time to go. Need's great. We're wasting time. This isn't a long-term goal. I'm not long-term called here. Let's just go, and so it was certainly a speed decision to get down there and go, not even really short-sighted necessarily, but what I will say is that timeline and that emphasis and that need and our kind of readiness to transition out of this and get into our own thing, definitely, if nothing less or nothing else, it caused us to overlook the need of team.
Yeah.
And be very dismissive of the need of team. And so I think, like a lot of things looking back over the last 12 years, that was just a gap. It was just a gap in my thinking that I did not see that as important as I do now.
Man, I completely agree. I feel like there was some biblical ignorance on the whole pattern of. You don't see. There's teams throughout the entirety of the New Testament. Acts is teams of teams. There's even when you find one individual personality, they're swooped up into a team. Like they're not just out there doing their own thing. And so that was, again, biblical ignorance on my part. Again, impatience, as you just said, like urgency, let's go do it, which isn't, I think, a bad thing to be urgent. Right. I think there may have been on my part, that's probably a little bit of lack of faith. Like, will God provide someone? I need to go. Like God was aware of all the pieces. And right. I could have waited, and God could have put that together. And I think I jumped ahead of him a little bit. There was, brother, and I said this in some previous episodes, there were probably some other people in my life that should have said, you need a team.
Yeah.
And no one did. And I praise God that the organizations and groups that I was connected with initially coming out here don't send people by themselves anymore.
Right.
And I think that's praise God. I think that is a strength when organizations, sending agencies, missions agencies insist on, we're either going to plug you in with an existing group, or you're going to have to find some people to go with you. We're not just going to send you by yourselves. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, I totally agree with you. And I know you've kind of hashed through this on a few of the episodes previously regarding just the ignorance and like the structure that you're looking to pursue. But I'm telling you, I would argue probably everything that you're going to talk about moving forward in the next 1,000,000-part series is going to be born out of this ecclesiology that's just really miswired, in a lot of ways. And so it's, for me, it wasn't even, certainly we were probably moving at a speed in which I didn't think about team. But to be honest with you, so part of our story is we had a family from our church back on the East Coast that was even considering, and they were praying about coming with us. And so that actually popped up as a possibility for us. And I remember talking with someone about the fear of what if they leave at X amount of months or X amount of years in the future. And so there was almost this sense of like, if they weren't going to come with me forever, was it worth their time to come at all, or was it worth my time to have them there at all?
Yeah.
And again, we'll get to biblical, I think pattern, but it just was such a wild mentality that I couldn't even, like, I remember knowing like, man, it'd be great to have some people to help with this. But at the same time, it was just, I was so focused on doing what I was doing. Anybody else coming to help, they felt like it was just something I didn't need to deal with at the time. And I think even that carried into Christians that joined us in the early days for initial services and things like that, to where I would keep them like at a distance because, well, for probably a lot of dumb reasons, but that might have been even one of them, where we're here to reach lost people, like you're already reached, like
Yeah.
we're looking. So
well, I understand that, because I, not just with teams, but I remember when we were starting in the conference center, and I've shared before that after our grand opening service, we went, a year with nobody, just me and my wife. And so when people eventually started coming, so not team, like attenders, I would latch onto them and be like, "Oh, we love you, stay forever," and it's like, that's almost like scary to people. And so there is this like, so something I have learned in this last season, this last 4 or 5 years, is to hold people with an open hand, and recognize people come and go. And that's just God, reshuffling the deck, right? He moves people around. And sometimes people go and they're gone for a season and they come back for a season. And sometimes people, they go on to something else. And so I think recognizing teams doesn't necessarily mean we're bound together for eternity, shoulder to shoulder or whatever. But we are playing a part in the bigger picture. That has been helpful to me. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think our sending pastor told me one time, it's probably it's some of the best advice he's ever given me. And he said, people are like sand. The tighter you hold them in your hand, the more fall out, Yeah. And
that's good.
But I again, I didn't really listen well to that, because I did the same thing. You just get in this sense of desperation. And I think a lot of that desperation is tied to a lot of unhealthy stuff and a lot of stuff that we no longer really have to even think about, honestly, in the way we're formatted. But the principle is true for sure, with people. So,
well, speaking of desperation, what happened with us is we got here. Provo is the least reached metro in America. I'm in the 8th least reached county in America, the least reached state in America. Discouraging, dark, slow going. It didn't at all unfold like I thought it was going to unfold. Like I thought I was going to get here and masses of people were going to start turning to Jesus. And so it was very discouraging, very hard. And again, the pace was just a crawl. And so I realized I did need help. And now I became desperate for help. And desperation is a dangerous place to lead from. And so I basically began to, I went back to the East Coast and I stood up in a couple different services, big churches full of people, and was begging, like almost through tears, someone come with us. Now you're opening the door. Like if you, like, beggars can't be choosers, right? So you're standing up front begging, saying, someone come with us. And then someone says, I'll go. Oh man. And that's what has happened. So we had people come, and I think come like, I will come help you. But we jumped into teams a number of times the last 12 years that I think there was no intentionality in like the cohesiveness or the chemistry of those teams. Does that make sense?
So wow. So you guys actually had some people come and help for few months.
We had after the first, we were here a little over a year. We had a couple come, big young family, did not end. They were here for several years, did not end well. Ended up blowing a bunch of stuff up. Had another couple here join us, blew a bunch of stuff up. Another couple move out to help us, blew a bunch of stuff up. We have a couple here now who's from out of state specifically to help us. And I've threatened their life. I'm like, look, I've been through this 3 times. You know better not mess with this. It's not going to be good for you if things go south. So
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. No, they need to know. Me and a guy in our church went for a hike this morning before our gathering, and he found some other trail that he wants to go and do the next week. And he was like, "Hey, I'm not going to make it to church this morning. I'm gonna be a little busy." And he's joking, And I said, "I will cane a sheep, bro."
Oh my gosh.
Oh man. Yeah. Wow. That's kind of interesting. Like, I mean, we're in a super, everywhere's needy. Oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah.
We are in Orange County, California, which is such a interesting place, like, I could name probably 3 of the largest churches in America that are in this area.
Yeah.
And you would know them. And by and large, good ministries. They're teaching, good biblical things. They're getting the gospel out. They're actually planting, I'd call them churches, but they're like satellite type stuff, whatever. But, in a 5-mile radius, I have 8 million people, here. And literally every city, like the maximum of church attending people, much less people that would identify as like a follower of Jesus, is under 50%. It's under 50%. And that's in every city around me. Some are as high as over 80% non-religious, right? Yeah. So huge need. That was one of the reasons we came, here. And having no team, we found that you're just grinding through people. So you said like the pace is a crawl, right? Yeah. But it's also not a crawl, because even as slow as the church is growing, or whatever, however you want to phrase that, you are at light speed in everything. Because, and again, I don't know how far down that rabbit hole you want to go in terms of like the format and the production, level that you're trying to do. But we over time did build some teams, but our story has been one of teams leaving, where they just dissipated, and there was and this is kind of one of those things where I think even in the early days of starting and not thinking of team is just the complexity of team, like you don't have time for team because teams are complex. Couple that with the idea that I'm not really sure I need it. And it was simpler, just to be us, but it just comes at such a price,
Well, yeah. Let me ask you this. When you started, were you doing an attractional type model?
Yeah. So and let me just explain the hard-headedness and the misguidance of what we were doing. We found a gym that was empty on Sundays. They charged us $500 to be there. And we literally rolled out 3 rolls of 40-foot by 12-foot carpet, gray carpet, because gray was a cool color,
of course,
instead of burgundy red. We set out like 60 chairs in 3 sections. We brought out a platform made of plywood and set it there with a wooden pulpit in a gym in March, which the weather was kind of cool. Then we strung out 2 TVs, ran HDMI cords 40 feet back to a computer, and put up an entire pipe and drape system to enclose all of that for 6 years.
Wow.
It was a 45-minute setup. And that was if you had a team of people, like if people started coming and they decided to help you. Yeah. Otherwise it was an hour. And that was before, that was after, every Sunday. It was actually more than 6 years, but we started changing some things, with the size and different things that we would do.
Well, that highlights what if you're going to go the attraction, which is what we did a mobile church. So we were meeting in a rented space, a conference center. Yep. So there was set up and tear down for us too.
Yep.
And we were doing the launch model, like the big grand opening, attractional. If you're going to go that route,
Yes.
you have to have a team.
Yeah.
Like that was the dumbest thing I think I could have done, to say, we're going to go mobile, we're going to go attractional, and it's just going to be me and my wife doing it all.
Yes.
Like that was ridiculous. And I
Yes.
think, I mean, in hindsight, I would not have come, like, there, we did our grand opening. We had no music because we didn't have any music. Like, so I would have, if you're going to build a team around that model, I think you need to have someone taking care of music, someone taking care of tech stuff, someone taking care of children's things, all of those pieces that you're wanting to serve the community. I mean, you got to have people in place for those things, and not just feel like you're going to run around and do it all, in addition to setting up and tearing down and then prepping everything during the week. And so I think there are some methodologies. I think teams are necessary across the board, but something like an attractional model, that's ridiculous not to have a huge team. Like, that is ridiculous.
And the thing too, and something else. So we were close enough to the school I went to where they were sending down students, and at a level, right, that was a team. Right. So we had some piano players, we had some kind of kids ministry kind of thing that we could do. But semesters end,
right,
for one, and they graduate for another. And again, because I was not thinking really about building team, it became this thing where they would just graduate and go, and it wasn't until about really our fourth year that I remember really asking a guy to stay. And he was so of the same kind of mentality. He was just doing his thing, and so he ended up not staying. And then I think there's another piece of that for us specifically. It was like the place that we live in was just so expensive. It was just, Utah certainly not maybe as expensive in living conditions as Orange County, but bills are bills,
right.
And so you could talk about the call to be in a place versus the ability to be in a place and stuff like that. But
and that may be something, and I don't know if we'll delve into it here, but there is this, you're bringing a team in, I think, to catalyze something new, to start something new. And then there's the idea of you're going to raise a team up from the harvest.
Yes.
And I think both are important. And I think you see both biblically. You see these catalytic, apostolic type teams, missionary type teams come in, start something. And then all of a sudden there's a bunch of co-laborers, and they're from that place. And so I wasn't even thinking in those terms here. I was relying very heavily on the outsider and that kind of stuff. But I wish we had done some similar things, because we would have mission teams come, and we would have, again, that back end, that tooth to tail kind of concept. There's people helping. Yeah. But I wish we had kind of figured that out a little better. So,
and then on the other side of that too, I think with because it wasn't like, if you would have asked me back then, do you want a team, or are you trying to build a team? I would have said, yeah, absolutely. We're trying to coalesce people to reach people for Jesus. The problem is any tool that I would have had available to me to that was it was so far beyond what our church would have been able to work into. Like I'm good, right? I've managed and done ministry at a ministry with hundreds, thousands of people. But when you're dealing with 30, 40 people coming on a Sunday, I mean, these people have jobs, they're new believers, some aren't believers, some are just getting back into the habit. A lot of the resources that are out there for team development don't really give you a strategy at that level. I mean, they're using terms like leadership pipeline, and you're like, leadership pipeline? Like, no one's coming to a development seminar for a weekend. Nobody's taking 3 days out of their week to get developed for this church of 40 people, So a lot of this stuff, it was just, there really weren't good, simple leadership development tools that were available that could have just maybe bumped us one level up in our leadership. And then two, to your point, there was never, there just wasn't a clear train of thought on this kind of initial team that I've got kind of in the meantime, and really having them start pouring in and thinking just replacement, like, hey, you're going to be graduating in 2 years. Let me help you train this person
while you're here. Yeah.
And then we had some lay people step up, obviously, here and there too, but it was like, and I always did the thing like, hey, if you're tired, tell me and we'll let you sit. Like, cause I didn't want to be that, like, just driving people into the ground. But what would happen is people would take me up on that, but there was just never like, oh, I'm getting a little weary. Let me kind of see if I can hand this off to someone. Or that always fell back on, to me. So,
well, and this may be outside of this conversation, but that does touch on, and I'm saying it so I'm reminded to come back to it down the road. Starting things ahead of maybe what the people, the church, the work's ready for.
that's a whole nother.
It is a whole nother. I mean, we get way ahead of yourself, and you start all this stuff, and you're ahead of yourself because you burned everybody out. So that's, I think, a good sign that we shouldn't have done that. So I've come to realize now that church, here's what, so if I was starting over and I was doing the attractional model, man, I'd bring a big team, gifted people, different areas of ministry. I mentioned Nelson Searcy's book, Maximize, talking about fundraising. He has another book. I was a big Nelson Searcy groupie. He has a book called Launch, Starting a New Church from Scratch.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going the attractional model, that's a great resource. Check that out. That's awesome.
Yeah. Totally agree.
But I realize now there's like church planting teams, I think should be, here's my opinion, more of your apostolic, prophetic, evangelistically gifted individuals. Think of like Ephesians 4.
Yeah.
Because they're going to they're going to start new things and push the edge of the work out.
Yep.
And then raise up people or have people come in that are more your shepherds, teachers who bring depth and maturity to that work.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I think I'm very much gifted the more apostolic evangelistic way than I am the teacher shepherd way. But I remember the sending, so this is probably connected even to sending agencies, because when they sent us out here, they asked me, you're going to start this church. Do you plan on being the pastor there for, like indefinitely? And I said, yeah, I didn't know that was an option not to be, I was like, yeah, I'll be the pastor. And that was what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
But I realized, man, it would have been helpful, I think, to have teamed with some more missionary, apostolic, evangelistic type personalities, started something, and then trust God would raise up the local leaders in a time, And so I even think the teams that we had in that desperation, pulling people in, come help us, and the people are responding, those weren't apostolic personalities or missionary type personalities. They were willing bodies, and they had their own skills and abilities and passions, but I don't think they were what we needed at the start of a church plant.
Right.
And so the team itself was a team. There was a group, but it was a weak team. And so maybe speak to creating the right mix of, I don't think everyone needs to be the same. Like, that quote by Mark Twain, like if two people agree on everything, one of them is unnecessary.
Yeah.
I think that's true probably in a spiritual sense. Like if we all have the same gift mix, we all then one of us is unnecessary,
Yeah.
So I'm not looking for conformity, but speak to maybe what you've seen or what you're learning as far as maybe teaming to our weaknesses or teaming to our abilities or something of that nature.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really don't.
I felt like it was a good question.
I don't really think I have that figured out still. I mean, I'm eating everything I can, so to speak, on, development, team, that sort of stuff. So, but I guess, and if I'm not hitting what you're wanting, just let me know. But I think that when it comes to me looking at people now, I tend to group them a little bit more in the Ephesians 4 thing for sure, because it's such a simple matrix,
Yes.
It's very easy to so I told our church this a few months ago, you never have to go find leaders. They're just there, because they're leading, that's just what they do. You don't have to convince a leader to lead. So they're starting something, they're moving in a direction. And I don't care how long or short they've been saved, like that's just their personality, they're going to be initiating things. And so for me, it's just been helpful for me to think of people in our church in those terms. So I'm just looking for people that I can identify that are willing to move, because a huge mistake I made was trying to force a personality type into people
Yes.
because I needed it, like, you don't seem to understand because the race is to 100, right? You got to get to 100 people as fast as possible, because that's how you know you're a successful church planner is you run 100 people. And so it was like I was trying to drive people into being these, kind of just drivers for kids or youth or music or discipleship or singing or announcements, whatever. Audio, video, trying to help these people get into these roles and then drive that train forward. And there's for sure something to be said about, the leader's always out front on all the fronts, I guess. But if we're talking about that attractional model, okay, you've got to kind of push all that out. But what you certainly don't want to do is get like you said, right? You don't want to get a shepherding individual and then try to stretch them into some pace of growth, because that's just not what they're doing.
It's going to be hurtful to them, and I don't think it honors how God created them. Like, exactly. I think it's dishonoring to the Lord. He brought this person to you and you're misusing them.
Yes.
And so it's like a stewarding piece of, I got to recognize. And again, we both mentioned it, the Ephesians 4 passage. Let me just reference a tool real quick. Fivefoldministry.com, spell out the number 5, F-I-V-E, fivefoldministry.com. It is a spiritual gifts type test sort of thing and there's also explanations and tools there, but it explains this Ephesians 4 passage we're talking about. So it's a great resource. But yeah, I think it would have been wise on my part to recognize some individuals coming in are not going to be the ones out knocking doors or out, sharing the gospel in the park, or they're the ones who are going to backfill with health and do some stuff internally. I didn't know that. And so I heard a bunch of people and I burned a bunch of people out.
Yes.
So,
it's it's painful. I had a good friend of mine, say that a mentor of his told him one time, God will, how did he put it? He said, God will kill a lot of sheep to make a shepherd.
Wow.
And I don't
know how I feel.
I know that guy. And certainly he wasn't telling me that because he overly agreed with it. I think he was just making the point to me that, unfortunately, right, I damaged a lot of his sheep to get where I am as a shepherd, and unfortunately that statement is true. It's certainly not what we ought to seek after, but unfortunately that's true in my case. I'm sure I've hurt some people because I was because I was more interested in what I was going to talk about at the next conference, or the results I was going to maybe see from that, or some sense of fear of impending doom on the church plant that I didn't want to confront, or just to be able to say, I've got this role now, in my church. Because, in the early days of the church plant, all of that stuff is very, very important for some really terrible reasons, up into including support. And so anyways, that's off track. But the point I guess I would make is that now I tend to really look at that as a lens, apostle, prophet, evangelist, teacher, shepherd, or pastor shepherd. And but then also within that, I'm looking for a couple of things. I think a good acrostic is the FAT, an acronym, right?
Yeah.
Faithful, available, teachable.
That's great.
It's such a great overlap. If you're not faithful, but you're available and teachable, who cares? If you're not available, but you're faithful and teachable, again, who cares? And if you're not teachable, you're just a frustration for everybody. I had another guy, and so I use the FAT acrostic, and then I use HHS, which is they have to be hungry, humble, and smart, because we don't want idiots running, God's kingdom. And we don't want a bunch of arrogant, people, and but the hunger is important. People we want to see, we want to invest in people, especially if we're talking about movement, when we're talking about mission. Certainly, all of those aren't necessarily qualifiers for someone to be a good shepherd and a teacher. But I think me and you, planted with the DNA of mission and evangelism, and that's just something that I don't think will ever leave me.
No.
It's just I'm just so wired with it, to a fault, to be honest with you. It's actually terrible. It hurts me in so many ways, but the but those are healthy indicators for guys that are in my church that can run with me. And so it's instead of trying to get people to run with me, it's helped me to clarify who could run with me.
And I think so. Two things come out of that. One, with the teaming aspect, it reminds us that teams are fluid because availability changes in season life. So someone who may be faithful, available, teachable right now enter a season where some of those elements are missing. Someone who's hungry and all this, it's a change, right? So it's
Go
ahead.
And these are things like we talk about in our church often, so if someone becomes unavailable, this is not a critique on you and now you're not a less than. This is just, for us, it's we would work in like a PAW principle, PAW, preparedness, awareness, and willingness. And if you don't have awareness, that's a major issue. And so if you're really wanting to be involved in ministry and do mission, but your availability is not, what right. Some people will just try to be available, but they're not available. And it's like, hey, maybe you're in a season of, like you said, unavailability,
Right.
And that's okay. Like, I get it. You lost your job and we've got a guy in our church right now, been with us for 10 and a half years. His availability sucks. Like, he is working all the time, but he's texting me when he's not able to be there. He's around, so it's, and yeah, what am I going to do? I'm going to badmouth that guy because he's got to take care of his family, no, that's crazy, so, yeah.
Well, the second thing that came out of that, all your many acronyms, your corporate jargon or whatever you got going on there, like so is the cohesiveness that comes around vision and your mission and event like this. So like, I think that is so important for everyone, especially if you're going to say like an acknowledgement of we're teaming together, like we're running together, we're purposely laboring together as a team, to have buy-in on what it is you're running towards.
Yeah.
Like this vision. I think, because I saw this, I think I had a vision and I was terrible at communicating it. And then in my desperation, begging for people and help, I had people come because they were responding to my plea for help, but they weren't bought into my vision. Right? Yeah. They just had an emotional response, I think, to my plea for help. Yeah. And so we saw that time and time again burn us. Luckily, we're in a great season now where there is so much clarity on vision and the teams are running after it. But what have you seen that you want to speak any more to that? Just the importance of what are we doing together?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. So one thing I just wanted to put out there that I meant to say at the beginning is, like, a small vision requires no team, right? Like, yeah. And by vision, again, we were talking about this before we started talking, but by vision, I don't mean what I felt I was called to do, right? Okay. So my background was, I was at a church planners conference. Some dude threw nails all over the platform. And I went and grabbed like 20 of them. And I'm like, I'm planting 20 churches in North Orange County. That was a little bit of a seedling. Yeah, it's hilarious, right? But
it's awesome.
It was a seedling for me of what we are on mission to do now, which is to plant churches in North Orange County. So I can look back at that and still see God, doing, whatever he's done in me through that time. But if I'm being honest, man, like, that wasn't the vision. It was just, between some other things that we went through in the initial start with funding and support and team and lack of, and, all this sort of stuff, which is the story of every church planner. I'm not special in that, but it was just, it became not even really survival. Well, yeah, kind of, it just kind of became survival. And then it translated to, I think the vision was never communicated very often because it was selfish. It was, I'm trying to get to 100 people. And because 100 was a magic number, for whatever reason. Or I'm trying to get a building, So again, a small vision requires no team. And a small vision is rarely shared by someone that holds it, I think too. So for me, I was going to plant churches and wanted to plant churches, but my real vision was just to maybe not be a failure, and just maybe get to 100 and maybe just last. At some point, it became a very, I forget the book, but it became very much not abundance mindset, very much scarcity mindset of what can we keep from going wrong, not how can we make an impact, and so that was a huge issue, for us. So that small vision requires a team. So I guess back to my point where what I was making is this vision that we're called to is not like Isaac's vision of planting churches in North Orange County. It's God's vision to multiply his image all over the earth. And that includes, for me, that includes North Orange County. And God willing, maybe that involves California with me next, and maybe other parts of Southern California. That'd be amazing. But this is the vision I'm running towards now, right? Because whatever. And I have to have people. There is no way, like we estimate there are something like 2.5 million people in Orange County that are without Jesus.
Wow.
And that doesn't even compensate for sleepy Christians, right? That aren't connecting with Jesus and aren't sharing their faith and aren't making disciples and aren't, whatever, right? So how are we going to do that? It requires me to be very clear about what we're doing. And the great thing is it's a clarity about, it's not even my vision, it's his vision. Yeah. And like you said, we're just trying to lock together. We're trying to run together to do this through health, like through our own individual health is what we're trying to do. And so I think I'm kind of missing the point of your question. Now every week we have vision in front of us, where we are reminded that we're on this vision to multiply his image. So I don't even really get that specific on church planting. I mean, we talk about it obviously, but we're much more fixated on multiplying Jesus through health. I think is, if you were to ask our church, like, hey, what are we walking towards together? They would say health, first of all, which was not what we were running towards originally,
It's come up a couple times here. Maybe we'll wind down with this. We've both said it, that the teams are a biblical pattern. And I mean, it is the biblical pattern. In fact, so Isaac sent me some notes over just prior to our conversation, but I want to read. So he had some Bible. We're not going to read. There is a ton of passages to illustrate this point. The one I want to start with is Acts 13:13, where just Paul and his companions. Yeah. And then, I mean, that I think captures the tone of the book of Acts. And then there are a slew of references here through Acts and beyond of people there together. They're serving together, they're traveling together, they're in the harvest together, sharing the gospel, preaching together, they're in churches together. I mean, I think if someone was looking for an action item to come out of this, I would say two things. One, I would say, do not go to the field without a team. Like that would be like, whatever, if you're planning, I'm just gonna go by myself, I'm gonna say, please stop. Like, please do not do that. Save yourself the frustration and the hurt and the heartache and the pain and the burden, and do not go by yourself. You do not possess all skills and all abilities and all giftings. Like, you need some help. So that would be my first urge to, I'm urging someone to do. Second thing would be just to go through the New Testament. You could start even in the Gospels and just see how often people are serving together in teams. And in the Gospels, you obviously got the 72 and the 12 and the 3 with Jesus. And then you get into Acts, so many apostolic missionary teams in the book of Acts. And then in the epistles, almost all of them ending with giving, greetings to all these different people that they know in these different places that they love and care and are serving with. And so I think it would be a healthy reminder to walk through and say, okay, as a believer, I'm supposed to be in community. Like, that's what God creates me to be in a body. But then even as a laborer in his harvest, I'm supposed to be in a corporate community. I'm supposed to be a part of a team. Like, it's never just me. by myself. So I wonder, Isaac, if you want to speak to the biblical pattern, or maybe just move it towards some application, something you just challenge someone with. I know we've referenced a couple resources, even if you got something else we didn't touch on, you want to just throw out, check this out. Let's do that here.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think your point is just so key. I mean, just look at the biblical pattern, if you, I mean, because you can't get away from it, I mean, Acts 11, Acts 13, Acts 14, Acts 15, other parts of Acts 15,
it just keeps
Acts 19. I mean, it's just stupid, so it's if you just read the book of Acts, and certainly parts of the Gospels where Jesus sent out his disciples 2 by 2, there was
never sends them by themselves. Yeah.
I mean, every single time. There is no, like, the Lone Ranger, illustration is played out, but I'm telling you, man, like, there is just no such thing. I mean, look, I had the privilege of serving in a pretty, high-end unit when I was in the Marine Corps. And I will never forget, I was working at Applebee's in Memphis, Tennessee. This is before I joined. And this guy was telling me that he did these like super sneaky squirrel missions, and he was in the Marine Corps, and he was going on and on and on about how they would train them to do everything by themselves, and they'd have to go out and really prove themselves. And then when I got into that, it was the complete opposite. Everything is team. I mean, you would get yelled at and punished if you didn't have your battle buddy. And it's like, to use your kind of, what was it called? The tip to tail?
The tooth to tail ratio. Yeah.
That military, kind of language again, like, if the military is doing this, and certainly there's not really much departure from that language that you need to move to scripture. I mean, we're soldiers, right? So I'm a Marine still, but whatever, like, it's just, there's just no room for this nonsense of like, I'm just going to go out here and do something on my own, because granted, you'll do something, but I promise you, it's not going to be like God's vision. It's just not going to be what he's interested in, perhaps at the level, I want to be careful here about getting into like size stuff, but there's a level that he has, that he wants you to be a part of. And I think with team, that's huge. And look, I'm talking from having been here 12 years with no team. Like, we came here with no team. We've gone through a couple of teams, and I am in the process now of rebuilding team. Like, this is my 4th go at rebuilding team here. And so eventually one day I'm going to be really good at building teams. It just hasn't clicked yet,
Yeah. Well, that's why this is a 1,000,000-part series.
Oh my
because
goodness.
because you're going to keep making mistakes in it.
Yeah. What I would say is listen closely. So a couple things, right? I would say, if you're getting ready to go plant a church, okay, yes, you need to put everything else on hold and just think team. Like, I would not even, there's just no reason to even consider a start place. And I mean, like, specific location. And again, I know we're talking a little out of the attractional promotional context here, but even if you're going to a place and you're going to do more of like a simple Bible study in your home approach, or like a pre-launch kind of thing, this advice would still be pertinent and important for you. I wouldn't even look for the house. I wouldn't look for the location. I really wouldn't look for anything else until I had really spent a lot of time praying, listening, and seeking out a team member.
Yeah.
And here's what I know about prayer is, when we're praying for people, they tend to pop up. They just do. I mean, we could talk about the household map of prayer for evangelistic purposes. Certainly you could translate that over into a church planting team, idea. And when you pray for laborers begin to come. And they're probably closer than you think. For example, the family that we had, they didn't end up coming out here, but the family that we had, one guy was a guy I grew up with my entire life in my home church back in Georgia. And his wife was a friend of ours through high school. And I would say, pray and look immediately around you. And I would say, be very vocal about your need of team, and not from a neediness, standpoint, but just cast the vision. I mean, you're obviously excited about going to plant the church. You're obviously excited about God's call, about his work. you're excited about the hope of Jesus. You're excited to share that. And that, right, that's what we lead with. That's vision.
Yeah.
It's not even really about the possibility of what may happen out there. It's just health, making disciples. We're being obedient. Why don't you come be obedient with us? Why don't you help us make disciples? Let's go declare his name. And yeah, then lead maybe with like, hey, here's the breakdown. Here's the religious breakdown. Here's the need that's out there. And certainly all of that stuff is relevant. But then two, I would say, as you talk and when people pop their hand up or they're interested, I mean, I would invest like crazy. I mean, I'm in insurance sales as a bivocational guy, man. And I would say, I don't know, I would get them around a table and I would just try to figure out what you could provide and what they would need and what that would look like. I would just begin asking so many questions about what has got them interested. What are they excited about? What do they like about that area? I mean, do the research across the table and just find out how to pour that vision back appropriately into them, to see them, not sell them. But if they're interested and they're throwing their hand up, that you need to really understand like what's driving that. And then ask. I mean, just ask. Oh man, that would be my best advice on team. I think is just pray for it. Obviously, you've got to pray for it. Look around, because I promise you, the people that care about you. I mean, it's like what you said with the sport. The people that care about you, the people that know you, the people that have been around you, the people that know where you're going and what you're doing, they are the best case scenario for you finding people that are going to actually go with you in more importantly, a helpful way, that aren't going to blow it up whenever they leave.
Yeah. Oh, it's good, brother. All right. So I hope this was helpful for you. If it has been, please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a rating, comment, review. I would also ask that you share it. I mean, just pass it along. If you're part of a church planting team, someone who's church planting, thinking about church planting, whether they're already on the field preparing to go, please pass this along, post it on your social media. We would appreciate that. Isaac, is there a way if people wanted to just connect with you or see what you're doing, got a website or an email address or something you want to drop here before I wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, our website's inlandhillsoc.com. It's a live active site. We use it for some stuff. I am on Facebook. If you would care to look me up, I am on that thing like once every 3 months. I've really
so no, that's not a good way to connect.
Yeah. You could email me at Isaac, ISAAC at inlandhillsoc.com. Other than that, I'm really never on Twitter because I hate it.
Very good.
Or come to Orange County and I'll buy some coffee.
There you go, man.
I love drinking coffee. So,
well, bro, I appreciate you being on this here with me today. My name, dude, it's been great. So my name is Logan Wolf, and this is Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a 1,000,000-part series.